When I was a kid around the age of 12 or 13, I became obsessed with survival horror. I grew up a very frightened child, but with this fear came a certain curiosity. At the time, I found myself acquainted with games like Resident Evil 2, which really opened the door for me and showed me how much potential this genre had. But in looking for more games to fulfill this craving, there was one series I just couldn't get off my mind: Silent Hill. Something about this franchise from the moment I got wind of it just drew me in. Some mass concoction of its oppressive atmosphere, its horrifying ambience, and its emotionally gripping narratives. It just all grabbed hold of my attention, and I knew I needed to play these games. My first choice was to play 2, obviously, but I grew up with a GameCube and had no way to get my hands on a PS2. Some time passed and my obsession grew into fanaticism, and for Christmas that year, I got my PS3. Soon after, my well-meaning cousin bought me Silent Hill Downpour for my birthday, and while I appreciate the thought, this is definitely not what I was looking for, and I quickly dropped it. Then one day, in the middle of July, I noticed something unusual on the PSN store. Amongst the Japanese-only JRPGs and Jumping Flash laid Silent Hill, and I knew this was my chance. So I took my bike to the local CVS and paid the $10 I needed for a PSN card, and I rode home as fast as I could. On the hottest day of the year and dripping in sweat, I waited anxiously for the download to finish. And once it had and I booted up the game, still hyped up on all the adrenaline I just experienced, a year and a half's worth of non-stop obsessing was finally about to pay off. And when I took my first steps into the town of Silent Hill on that sweltering July day, I felt as though I was freezing. I knew then and there that I could never look back.
Now it's too late for me. This town will eventually take me. Too late for me. This town will win. Through this fog they came along. Dark creatures singing a terrible song. The rest of the bar laughed at him. Only I felt my own gripped in. They found him dead the very next day. No more stories from him, I heard them say. We blame bad luck for his fate. Only I felt terror so great. She and he will know that someday all things will end. That misty night, that dismal moon, the dead search for their kin, while angels sleep in endless dark. The dead seek out sin.
I give myself this intro because last time around, I don't think I adequately conveyed how important of a series Silent Hill is to me. As I grow older and revisit these games, I tend to find more and more that I love about them, along with being able to finally find the words to really explain why I hold each of them so dearly. Which is why for Silent Hill 1, I decided to share that little anecdote with you. Not only because it's relevant, but because Silent Hill is a game that I didn't immediately get, so to speak. At the end of my first playthrough, I came to the conclusion that I played a spooky game and I liked it a whole bunch, but I couldn't quite place what felt so special about it. This was around like 2014. Then 3 years later, I'd beaten Silent Hill 2 and 3, and my whole perception of these games had completely changed. And I instantly went back to 1 and left it thinking it was still a great horror game, but it just couldn't possibly live up to the heights of 2 and 3. This is the major mistake that I have seen repeated by countless people getting into the series. Often when you're about to get into a big franchise such as Silent Hill, you have people who have already played the games to kind of give you a bit of a guided tour through just general fan perception of each of the titles. Take for example Metal Gear Solid. Sure, everyone loves MGS2 and 3, and with good reason. They're the best in the franchise, and oh yeah, 1 is there as well, but it's just the first game, no big deal, just play it because, you gotta. Some people take this kind of reading to Silent Hill, but forget one very important detail. Silent Hill is not Metal Gear Solid. It's been 4 years or so since I had last completed Silent Hill 1 in earnest, and in that time I'd begun to dedicate more thought as to what Silent Hill actually makes me feel, and what that first title did so right to get me in the door. This video is basically the compilation of my thoughts from 3 different times in my life, from 3 very different versions of me, all combining to make one statement on a game that each of us had loved. And that statement is, Silent Hill is a game that I enjoyed so much because I felt a fear of mine had finally been seen. Being afraid is just a fact of life. Every person deals with some form of fear one way or another, whether it be something small like the inevitable heat death of the universe, or something world-ending like an uncomfortably big spider. Fear is just a natural response to the unknown, or in some cases, to the things you know all too well. It frustrated me because I could really trace my fears back to very particular things, except one. And it's that fear that I'll be addressing as we get through this video together. But for now, let's look at Silent Hill in context to its release, and we'll work up from there. It's pretty well known at this point that survival horror as we know it began with either Sweet Home for the Famicom or with Alone in the Dark for MS-DOS. Then in 1996, Capcom blew the lid off the whole thing by releasing Resident Evil, thus creating many of what would become staples of the genre going forward. With a follow-up in 1998 fixing pretty much any and all complaints left over from the first go-around, the series was primed and ready to knock it out of the park with a third title. But it was in this gap between RE2 and 3 that we would see the release of Silent Hill, which was seen as Konami's attempt to hop on the craze that was started 3 years prior. But unlike the RE clones that you would see before and after, such as Overblood or Evil Dead Hail to the King, there was something just different about Silent Hill. Sure, genre conventions were there, tank controls, questionable voice acting.
Hold it. Where do you think you're going?
My daughter. I've got to find her.
And inventory management, but something was well and truly separating this game from its peers, and that something was this air of otherworldliness that permeated the entire affair. Pretty much everyone knows nowadays that Silent Hill is the go-to series for psychological horror, and that franchise name carries this foreboding atmosphere that chills people to the core just by thinking about it. But at the time, nobody had really seen anything like this. There were some titles like Dark Seed and Echo Night hanging around, but none had managed to reach an audience like Silent Hill. It sold over 2 million copies during its lifetime on the PS1, and it really brought Jacob's Ladder to an audience expecting Dawn of the Dead, and in doing so it changed how the genre was perceived. Silent Hill is arguably the most influential series in survival horror canon because it emphasized how important atmosphere and storytelling was to engaging an audience. Sure, a zombie in a room was scary and fun to deal with, but Silent Hill kept the dread ever present. You weren't safe just because you killed that monster. You are never safe. There are no save rooms in Silent Hill. Yes, most if not all notepads that you can save at are in rooms without enemies, but the game never lets you know that. There isn't a nice melody that plays to remind you that everything's gonna be alright, because as long as you're trapped in Silent Hill, it's not. An amazing way the game informs the player of this is by having a floating camera. Up until this point, most survival horror games use the fixed cameras pioneered in Alone in the Dark to evoke a sense that you're being watched. Hell, one of the first shots of Alone in the Dark is your character being watched by something within the manor. But as time went on, more and more games used this camera style, and it became old hat. D and Echo Night tried to reinvent the wheel by having the game experience from a first-person perspective to interweave immersion naturally, but Silent Hill took the approach of having a third-person camera almost as if it were something like Mega Man Legends or Siphon Filter. But the thing is, this camera wasn't a faithful companion who stuck to your back at all times. It was a floating entity that had a mind of its own. The player is able to exert a little bit of control over the camera by pressing L2, but for the most part, you're stuck with a thing that constantly hovers over you and just around your character as it swims from angle to angle. If a fixed camera makes you feel like you're being watched, then Silent Hill's camera feels like you're being hunted down. One of my favorite shots from this game comes from when you enter the final area. As you're desperate to see this to the end, the camera almost leaps in front of you as if to escape before you get a chance to. But before getting too ahead of myself, let's take it back all the way to the beginning with a brief overview as to what exactly is going on here. Silent Hill tells the story of author Harry Mason as we see him in an opening CG cutscene driving down a road obscured by PS1 draw distance before swerving out of the way of a little girl he sees in the middle of the street and subsequently crashing his car. He wakes up and notices that his daughter Cheryl is missing, and now it's up to him to find her. As a franchise rule, Silent Hill has an incredibly simple elevator pitch to get new players in the door. Harry just wants to find his daughter, James got a letter from his dead wife, Heather wants to go home, Henry wants to log off of Reddit. It's super simple, super easy to engage with setups that allow room for the narrative to expand naturally. There's a certain ebb and flow to how these games tend to progress. Most, if not all of them, allow for our protagonists to get their bearings and maybe interact with an NPC or two before putting them in a first major area and really introducing them to danger. For Silent Hill 1, however, they really needed to grab an audience, so they did the alleyway segment before the game proper truly begins. I could say in so many words why I adore this introduction, but I feel as though none of them can truly do it justice. Something about the way the intro is paced and the way the camera goes from this fixed perspective to swiveling on a pivot around this corner really seals this aura of uneasiness that becomes the standard for the next 5 or so hours. The end reveal is one of the most iconic shots in the franchise, and at the time, yeah, I could definitely see this shocking a few people if they weren't too distracted by The Matrix or Y2K. This channel really does have it all. The best introductions to games are almost a tutorial in not how to play them, but how to engage with them. Silent Hill takes a fairly mundane alleyway and makes it into your nightmare to let you know that all the power you thought you had going into this experience is actually wielded by the town itself. This sets the player's expectations for how the game will be playing them during their time at the helm. A major reason as to why this scene is so effective beyond the expert camera movement is due to how immersive Silent Hill is from moment one. Now, for the most part, Silent Hill is dated from a graphical standpoint, but to be completely biased, I absolutely adore the aesthetics of this game. Something about the environments and the lighting just looks so cold. I normally can describe the mood or feeling of each Silent Hill title in one word, and cold definitely fits the tone of one. Hell, it fits so much that the reimagining? Whatever the fuck Shattered Memories is, it fits so well that they theme the whole cover around this sensation of freezing. Something about how dead the town feels reinforces that frigid vibe, and anywhere you go only serves to expand upon that sub-zero decay that permeates your surroundings. Sure, the character models look like cereal boxes on their best day and my sleep paralysis demon on their worst, but something is so inexplicably charming about Harry and his complete deadpan squall face throughout every in-engine cutscene. Speaking of our main man, to flex the power of the DualShock, Silent Hill implements a really neat aspect where at pretty much all times you can feel Harry's heartbeat through the controller. Now, I just tested this with my copy of 2 and didn't get this kind of feedback, but if I'm wrong, please let me know, because as small as it seems, this little touch adds so much to the player being able to believe and connect with both this world and this character. Beyond graphics and haptics, let's not skimp over how, like he always does, Akira Yamaoka knocked it out of the park. The music in Silent Hill 1 is just magnificent, plain and simple. Hell, I have it on vinyl. I fucking love this thing. It is the blueprint to what would eventually be perfected in 2 and 3. The ambient drones, the harsh industrial clanging, the melodic strings. All of these elements crash and bang off of each other to make an erratic, schizophrenic, yet familiar and human soundscape that informs the player that they reside in a reality that knows them, but that they in turn do not know. Also, while I'm here, is it fair to say that the main theme of Silent Hill is my favorite piece of music on the PS1. There are some strong contenders: the main hall from RE2, the dungeon theme Courage from Wild Arms, Aerith's theme from Final Fantasy VII, all masterpieces in their own rights, don't get me wrong, but just Something about this intro. Something about it just sends a chill up my spine every time I hear it. Team Silent knew exactly what it took to get a player invested from an environmental standpoint, but that leaves us with the question of, how do I interact with this environment? And sad to say, but my answer is also the only harsh critiques I have of this game. Silent Hill 1 from a gameplay perspective is rough. Remember how I said a paragraph or two ago that I booted up 2 just to test the heartbeat rumble? Well, in those 30 seconds or so, I noticed how much smoother of a game 2 is to actually play. You see, let's say RE2 was like controlling a tank, okay? That is what tank controls mean after all. See, I told you this channel's got it all. So RE2 is like controlling a tank. Silent Hill 1 is like controlling the guy who's controlling the tank. Sure, if I tell that guy to turn, he's gonna turn. May take him a bit, and he will probably get his meat sucked by a demon kid and get 25 to life for it, but he will, at some point in this millennia, turn. As someone who's seasoned in the ways of Silent Hill 2 through 4, I thought myself a connoisseur of the old snake strategy to get around most enemies without fighting them. But Silent Hill 1 is the Steve Austin to my Vince McMahon. Yes, I may win now, but this game is always waiting to hit me with a stunner. That is to say, I fucking suck at maneuvering around enemies, and in turn, I died a lot. GG Silent Hill, but I'll be coming back next year with my no-death Silent Hill 4 run. Please don't expect anything about me. If I show 1 death on that, someone will be mad. Beyond its more than clunky movement, everything else feels fine from a gameplay perspective. My only other 2 complaints are, I feel as though there are too many enemies since a lot of them just latch onto you, and it gets old really quickly. But my other complaint isn't on a widespread issue like movement or enemies, but a more focused critique. A critique if the word is French for I want this puzzle to go jump in a ditch. Now, the following will probably forever change how you perceive me as a human being, so if you're in the camp that has a brain the size of Uzbekistan, I'm sorry for being such a dummy, but I seriously hate the piano puzzle. I don't know what it is with this puzzle, but every time I've come across it, I pulled up a walkthrough and I am not ashamed to admit it. It's weird because I used the walkthrough for 2 entirely different reasons when I played this game. My first few times were because I was told by an angry ginger Let's Player that you needed musical knowledge to even know how to approach the puzzle, but now, in forgetting the actual solution and wanting to give this thing a fair shot, I really tried to interact with it on the game's terms and found myself misled by the puzzle's description. The poem reads simple enough, birds represent piano keys and are color coordinated, but my issue lies right here. If this fucking line didn't mention only the dove being silent, then I could have inferred that the piano required me to play only the dead keys, since that would make some modicum of sense. But no, they had to add this one fucking adjective and just ruin the whole puzzle for me. If you think I'm an idiot for not getting the hint on this and not being able to figure out, fine by me. I didn't want to be loved by masters in theoretical symphonics anyhow. By the way, how's that degree paying the rent for you, dork? Enough venting about what totaled to be 6 minutes of my playtime before I cracked and looked it up. Let's talk about the areas these puzzles inhabit, as that's where the fun really begins. The best of Silent Hill's levels do a great job informing the player of one or more of the game's overall themes, and the worst of which are the ones that show up in Homecoming. But that's besides the point. Silent Hill 1 set the standard as to what you could come to expect out of a Silent Hill level. School, hospital, mall, sewer, theme park, God. Clear, cut, simple, they all tie neatly together under a central theme, and I will get to that when we enter spoilers. Each of these areas do a good job of having you interact with them for the time you need to and getting you out when you're finished. The worst of them is the sewers, and it's almost no contest. Yeah, go fucking figure, the sewers are the worst level, didn't see that coming. We really do have it all around here. Funnily enough, I feel like Silent Hill 1 out of the original trilogy plays around with the town of Silent Hill the best. You spend a decent amount of time here, and there are some neat key hunting puzzles that require you to traverse the perilous giant chasms? I'm gonna pull a bunch of thematic bullshit out of my ass in like 5 minutes, and let me tell you right now, I still do not have a good explanation for the giant holes in the ground, other than big hole equals scary. I want to talk more about level design, but that would require me to basically spoil the entire game, so you know the deal. If you want to experience the story for yourself, then I suggest you check out now, because beyond this point, anything that gets spoiled for you is not my responsibility. Okay, 3, 2, 1. It's funny because the game's about the fear of responsibility. You get it? My channel's an empire of dirt. Silent Hill 1 has one of the more expansive casts out of the main 4 titles in the series. I think 4 may actually have more characters, but like, do we really count the people who get murdered in 4? Do we? Do we really think Guy who dies in the chair is a substantial player in the grand lore of Silent Hill? Well, regardless of what you think, it's undeniable that Silent Hill's original cast is just as strong as the ones that would follow. Now, it is by no means the best cast in the series, but for the story it's telling, I gotta hand it to them. The game plays all of its pieces incredibly well. With a less adept writer at the helm, this cast could feel easily bloated, and in the context of a 5-hour horror game, that kills everything. But every character makes a point to stand out in some fashion and leave an impression that lasts a lifetime. For the sake of consistency, I want to discuss what I consider to be our 4 leads when I get more into theme, but suffice it to say, Harry, Sybil, Dahlia, and Lisa are probably the most fascinating group of characters present on the PS1. So what is that theme that I fucking spoiled to make a shitty joke? Put simply, Silent Hill is a game about the fear of responsibility and the many different forms this fear can manifest itself as. In the more universal sense, it examines the general anxiety that comes when something in your life changes and you are no longer the center of your reality. This is encountered at varying points in our life. Say, a younger sibling is born. You start a new relationship with a romantic partner. You have a child. All of these things require some form of input on our part, and that input requires us to take the focus off of ourselves. It's common psychology that the person we care most about is us. It's a survival tactic from a time before ours, but we're all cursed with the concept of a world built for us and that others are just merely players in. It's when this tendency to the self collides with the raw emotionality of caring that Silent Hill begins to work its magic. Silent Hill as a franchise, along with having a simple elevator pitch, all ask an equally simple question to form the arcs of its main characters off of. The first entry is no different, as it asks, why do you care for others? Everyone you meet has a different answer because we all require some form of motivation to break the primitive perception of only caring for the self. Of the above listed examples, Silent Hill definitely focuses on the concept of parenthood and the complex emotions new parents feel towards their rapidly changing role in life. Normally, I'd want to save the more prominent motifs to the end of the video to go out on a strong note, but in this case, I'm willing to break that convention to better illustrate my point. Harry Mason is probably the most capable character in a Silent Hill game. Nothing really phases him. Everything is more or less accomplishable and under his control. This theme of control is actually hinted at by the fact that Harry is a writer. He is the master of a million destinies, and so the game takes him to a place where he can no longer control his own narrative. Despite being the most competent protagonist, I feel as though Harry's journey is the most helpless. Every other protagonist has a relatively clear idea of where they need to be and what they need to do and where they gotta go to do it. And for Harry, frankly, he's in the dark and grasping at straws to find any answers he can. Harry's tale is told less so through the cutscenes we spend with him, but more so through his environment. The storytelling through the locations of Silent Hill are always A+, but there's such an uncanny normalcy to Silent Hill 1's locales that just unnerves me in a more intimate level. Every area in this game is what I'd like to call a parent's nightmare. Places that are by all means average, and in some cases places where good things are done and miracles are worked, but every second leading up to that good is a sense of unrelenting dread that eats away at a parent's heart. I'm not a parent, and I hope I'm not one for a long time, but I relate with this fear of losing control of someone you care about. When I was young, I had something happen in my life that required me to grow up faster than I probably should have, and that fear of every day losing that person that I care about because I made a promise to someone that I wouldn't let anything happen to them, that's something that doesn't leave you. Silent Hill 1 encapsulates this fear of mine through masterful levels that pick and prey on that niche, yet all too relatable fear. First stop, a school. A place of learning and growth is perverted into a hellscape where children are lost and mangled until they are no longer recognizable as human. School is normally the first time a parent is separated from their child, and it's a terrifying experience for both parties. Next, we enter a hospital, which is the last place any parent wants to see their child, where doctors and nurses meant to heal your kid may actually be making them worse. As someone currently studying to work in healthcare, I see families who are strung out and terrified because they have no idea what to do, especially in pediatrics. Parents just want their kids to be okay, and when they don't have an immediate answer to solve their problems, they get scared. The next two are tonally similar in that a mall and an amusement park are two of the most common places children can go missing. Whether it be recklessness or stranger danger, losing your child is the most helpless a parent can feel. If their kid gets sick, all they can do is wait and hope they get better. But if your child goes missing, not only are you helpless to do anything, but you begin to blame yourself. This leads us to the most unsettling location of all. Beyond a hospital, a school, a theme park, a mall, where is the one place your son or daughter could be that would induce a feeling of absolute despair? The answer? Nowhere. I do not know where my child is. These words send a shiver down the spine of anyone who is currently a parent. It is a full admission of terror because the only thing you think you know when you speak these words is that it's all your fault. Harry feels this guilt multiple times throughout the game as he receives calls from Cheryl begging for his help or sees her on a TV in an unknown location. These moments serve as some of the most terrifying in the whole series. In an ironic sense, Silent Hill makes the act of caring for others an innately self-focused affair because it all lies in the fault of yourself. The game takes this selfish view of selflessness and applies it to the primary antagonist Dahlia, as she takes the concept of parental control and care to its horrific extremes. Dahlia exerts her own will over Alessa in a gross display of domestic abuse, and the game makes it a point to show that Alessa as a person is of no concern to Dahlia, but Alessa as a means to an end is. Dahlia is a perfect point of comparison for Harry because the two are complete opposites. I feel as though this dynamic gets played with in a pretty interesting way in 3, since in that game Heather and Claudia have more in common with each other than either is comfortable with coming to terms with. But for Dahlia and Harry, there is no common ground for the two to stand on, other than they both just happen to be parents of the girl known as Cheryl. Now, the in-universe dynamics of how Alice exists are dubious at best, but in the grand scheme of things, it does not matter. What does matter are the attitudes our parents take to this child. Harry's is that of endless devotion and care for his daughter. He wants to see her grow and become her own person, but has a difficult time coping with the fact that one day she will actually be that person. When that day comes, he will have to accept that his daughter no longer relies on him, and he will eventually lose control over her. Meanwhile, Dahlia exists in a state of absolute control, but at the cost of her own daughter being nothing more but a doll. As described by Lisa, she was something that should have been dead, but for some ungodly reason was being kept alive. These approaches to how we treat our offspring are two of the most common ends of the spectrum. One can be seen as dismissive and ultimately uncaring despite coming from a good place, and the other, while overly demanding and at most points dehumanizing, could be seen as a more firm and consistent way to raise a child. Both have their pros and cons, but it's clear through the framework of Silent Hill that Dahlia is completely wrong because she lacks that want for her child to be happy. As much as it is human nature to look out for ourselves, something changes in you when you're prompted with this new role in life, and you begin to look for any way to make your child's life a better one. Dahlia is a personification of the unnatural and inexcusable behavior of abusers who use their children as an outlet for their own wants and desires, even if that desire is to simply control something in their lives. Silent Hill 3 deals much more in the long-lasting effects abuse and trauma has on someone, but Silent Hill 1 does a great job at showing how these abusive behaviors start and the psychology behind an abuser. The game presents the theory that abuse is born out of two emotions, fear and desire. As we've already addressed, Dahlia is a woman who will use anyone and everyone to her own ends and will perpetuate this cycle of abuse if it means she can have what she wants. This is all well and good, but you don't really see her express much fear towards her child because she knows that Alessa is right under her thumb. No, the fear aspect of abuse is shown through our protagonist Harry. Cheryl isn't Harry's biological daughter, and over the course of the game, this begins to weigh on him as he comes to grips with the fact that he doesn't know who or what his daughter truly is. This misunderstanding of the youth creates a latent paranoia in parental figures, and it is a changing of the times they're not prepared for. The little girl he once knew is wholly unrecognizable and may as well be another person entirely. This step towards maturation is a fact of life. None of us remain how we were when we were kids. We grow and experience life and change based on these experiences, but for the ones who raised us, they're unaware of all the things that made us who we were. What Silent Hill does masterfully in this aspect of examining abuse in tow with responsibility is that Harry is not an abuser. He merely is shown to start on the path that could lead to such toxic behaviors, and he has someone like Dahlia to stand as his opposite, a dark glow at the end of the road he may be walking down. One of my favorite aspects of this game is how after defeating the Incubus in the final encounter, Harry is given a brand new baby by Alessa. This could be seen as more weird Silent Hill a la Shather stuff, but the symbolism of the scene is incredibly evocative. Harry, whether he knows it or not, was always afraid of whatever was hiding behind the mask of his daughter. He was mortified that one day he wouldn't know who she was anymore. And this boss fight literalizes Harry killing his fear of his child and starting anew. Cheryl is a new person after the events of this game. Harry has the opportunity not to control his child and drive her away, but instead he has the ability to care for a new version of the thing he loves most in life. I'd like to step away from Harry and Dahlia for a moment to discuss who I consider to be one of the most underrated characters in a Silent Hill game. That person is Lisa Garland. Lisa is iconic, but I feel as though she's more of a face as opposed to a character when what she embodies is so uniquely harrowing. If Harry demonstrates the trials and tribulations that come with caring for someone you love and accepting that one day your relationship will change, Lisa is demonstrative of when you're forced to care for something you do not want, and that you might even hate. Lisa was once an aspiring actress who was forced to pick up a career in nursing. Developer commentary says her name was derived from actress Judy Garland, most famous for her role as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. Lisa was described by the dev team as a girl lost on her way to Dreamland. As the nurse to Alessa for 7 years, Lisa was forced against her will to care for something that she believed should not exist. Lisa had no part in the abuse of Alessa at the hands of the cult, but feels the guilt of that abuse by the mere fact that she's keeping this child alive. Her predicament is reminiscent of the violinist dilemma proposed by philosopher Judith Jarvis Thomson. She wanted to help originally. She wanted to care, but as time went on, she was not strong enough to do this and simply wanted out, but her circumstances left her trapped in an infinite purgatory of responsibility. While I'm at it, I might as well round out the cast by asking, where exactly does Sybil fit into all of this? If I'm being completely honest with you, she doesn't, and that's the point. Sybil is played up to be the love interest for Harry and also our secondary protagonist in some places, and the game does a little bit to play with the idea of them being an item. But as those familiar with the canon of the franchise know, this doesn't quite work out how we'd want it. Sure, the good plus ending has Harry saving his daughter and getting the girl, and it's all peaches and cream from there, but that's not really how this all ends, is it? No, Silent Hill's true ending is actually caught somewhere in the middle and is simply the good ending. It still results in Harry defeating the Incubus and running off with Cheryl, but to get there, he had to kill Sybil. It's a tragic end to a character who, while not around a whole lot, is still memorable and pretty likable. I feel bad for Sybil because she's more of a symbol than a character. She embodies a distinct split in priorities for Harry. Does he go after what he wants and pursue a relationship that would fill the hole left by his late wife, or does he own up to his own responsibility and take care of the one who needs him the most? It's the basic conflict of want and need, desire and dependence. It's a point that perfectly rounds out Harry as a character, and like I said, I relate to this on an emotional level. Through my childhood, having to care for that person in my life drained me. Sure, I was doing the right thing and I knew this, but that didn't stop that inkling of resentment. As small as it was, I can't deny it was still there. Not at this person, I was caring for them and I truly do love them, but just at the situation itself. I took a very why me approach to it, and those thoughts still linger. I wasn't slaving away every day and trying my best or anything. I'm no martyr, but I did shape a pretty decent part of my life around this. I had to orbit someone else, make sure they were okay, and that was my priority. Over the course of the pandemic, this person was moved to stay with a relative of mine due to my family and I working in a high-risk environment, and it's close to a year since I've seen them, and frankly, it feels kind of empty. I feel like I'm missing something, like there's something I need to be doing. It also left me a lot of room to reflect on something that has defined me for almost 12 years. I began to realize just how out of my depth I truly was, but how I wanted to handle it anyway. I remember people telling me the same pleasantries over and over again. Good kid this, superhero that. It almost felt like they were putting me in a box. Like I was special because I showed someone compassion and cared about them. It made me feel alienated. I felt like I wasn't human to these people. I was just some walking feel-good story they saw on the 6 o'clock news. It was about 3 years after this person moved in with us that I finally played Silent Hill and became enamored with it. I didn't realize it at the time, but the reason why, it was because it was the first time I felt like I'd been seen by a piece of media. I was still young and I didn't get all the subtleties of it, but I knew from the outset it was a story about someone who would do anything to protect the one he cared about most, even if that cost him everything. I wasn't losing my life or risking anything, but I did sacrifice some things. I really did give up a part of me to care for someone, and I saw myself in characters like Lisa and Harry because I felt like a bit of my predicament was theirs. I find myself in almost every Silent Hill title up to and including 4. I connect with these games, and it's a special thing to see something so personal to you brought up in such a nuanced and carefully presented way. It makes someone like me feel less alone. I feel like someone is out there, and even if it were just for a fleeting moment, they also felt like this. Even if it's a negative emotion, sharing in that response connects me with another person. I think that's why I hated those people who would endlessly praise me for doing what I was supposed to be doing. I feel like the game itself would also agree with me on that front because in the grand scheme of things, nothing I or Harry did was anything special. The game even makes it a point to reference this in Harry's notes. As I mentioned in Silent Hill 3, you can find save points and you can read them and you can get exactly what was going through Harry's mind at the time. As I previously highlighted, he seemed to know where caring for Heather would leave him and how to give everything to her, he may have to lose what he has. Silent Hill as a franchise deals normally in the death of the self. Sometimes literal, sometimes metaphorical, most times symbolic. Many times over the last decade, I felt that sense of me losing an aspect of myself to become someone different, but still uniquely me. I knew that caring for this person in my life would change me. At the age of 10, I would no longer be just a child anymore. I had more to do in my life. I needed to die to be someone else who could do this job better. It sounds like a lot, and I hope this doesn't come off as a sob story, because if I'm being honest, my life has been pretty great. But even then, I still come back to thinking about this stuff. I wonder what would be different. As much as I could speculate and think on this, I know that at the end of the day, nothing would change, and I wouldn't want to change anything. Through my experiences, it taught me how to really love others and how to stop being selfish. I wish it didn't have to play out that way, but now I think I'm okay that it did. The idea of Harry's character is willingly letting go of that which you want for that which needs you. It's a simple and evocative arc that I find myself constantly coming back to. If these things hadn't happened to me in my life and everything were different, I feel like I wouldn't be the me talking to you right now. I would be another me in another place, and I don't really want that. Words like heroes and the such make me sick now. It's why I avoid calling Harry the hero of this story, because he's not. He's a human being like me who simply did what he thought was right. He knew the risks, weighed his options, and went through with it anyway. And that is really inspiring to someone like me. His actions are not one of a mythic hero or of a savior. He wasn't a demigod sent to slay evil. Harry was a dad who just wanted to protect his daughter above all else. What he did was not heroic. It was merely a demonstration of the lengths we go for the ones we love. My name is Michael. Let's talk again soon.
Te esperaré toda la vida. Te esperaré hasta la muerte. Siempre, sin excepción.